I should probably start with a confession. For years, I've slept to the steady hush of rain recordings. Loops from old field tapes, clicks of worn cassettes, even compressed files pulled off servers in forgotten corners. I need it in the dark. Without it, my chest feels hollow, my mind restless and raw. It started after the loss, though I didn't admit that until much later. Rain made of fabric where silence had been torn open. Droplets against roofs and pavement disguised the emptiness. Their routine had become ritual. Check levels. Press record. Let the microphones catch whatever the sky surrendered. I didn't plan to keep most of it. Collecting sounds was the point, not archiving them. But tonight, something cut against that rhythm. I set a condenser by the window, one of the old cardioid units, more habit than choice. Levels looked steady. Red light stable. Outside, the drizzle softened to a steady sheet. Like brush strokes of water laid down with intention. At first, everything was normal. The sheet of rainfall, roomy and wide. Tiny clatters when drops hit the metal railing. Comforting, even. But then beneath it, not louder, not intruding, but unmistakably there a faint static. Not hiss, not random. My ear caught it before my brain formed words. Uneven at first, but then tightening, forming a line that pulsed. And inside the pulse, a hum. The hum sat low, chest height in pitch, then rose back. It moved like a breath held close to my ear. It pressed into me, not through speakers, but through the shape of the sound itself. I told myself it had to be spill from a nearby transmitter. Probably CB chatter or an unshielded appliance. I noted the time. Checked gain. Levels constant. Rain continued the same, but under it, that fragile thread pulled taut. I leaned closer. Listened harder. Too much detail made my head ache, so I pulled back, forced normal breaths. The hiss of water masked part of it, but not enough now that I had heard. I couldn't shake the impression it was patterned, though I wasn't ready to admit it. My screen spectrogram showed faint streaks where there shouldn't be any. Nothing clear yet. Nothing confirmed. Enough to send a chill that had nothing to do with the open window. When the drizzle thickened into downpour, I expected the anomaly to vanish under louder signal. Instead, it stayed. If anything, the rain only folded around it, making it sharper by comparison. Each passing second convinced me the hum was deliberate, as though it waited for cover to spill through. My arm hairs rose, a static electricity spark before the lightning that never came. I thought of switching the whole setup off. Just close the recorder, walk away, go to bed convinced it was in my head. But my hand froze mid-reach. What if it disappeared forever? What if this was my only brush with it? I could not leave it uncaptured. I glanced at the waveform on screen. Uneven rain slashes. And beneath them, steady banding, thin but persistent. For minutes, maybe more, maybe less, I listened. Tried to map the rise and fall. Tried not to put shape into randomness, the way one sees faces in clouds. But the hum kept pushing against denial. It recoiled like breath caught, then filled space again. I swallowed hard. Told myself it was nothing. Still, my fingers tapped notes. Time code, pitch estimate, decibel averages. My body recorded belief even while my mouth whispered denial. When I finally stopped the capture, silence did not return clean. The gap where rain had been was not whole. My walls carried echoes I didn't expect. Or perhaps just the memory of hum once heard. I can't tell where ears end and memory begins. Silence should have closed over me like a lid. Instead, it left a cavity where the anomaly seemed to curl and wait. I archived the file. Named it rain_0921. Did not overwrite, did not discard. As much as I wanted normal comfort restored, I could not part with proof. One file among hundreds, but my eye dragged back to that line each time. The night's peace had shifted. The familiar shelter of rainfall had been compromised, pierced by a foreign thread. Trust gone in an instant, though outwardly everything was the same. Lying down, I resorted to an old loop, hoping familiarity would cover unease. The sound poured around me, soft, enveloping, steady. Yet beneath it, I felt not a hum exactly, but the expectation of hum. Like a phantom afterimage when lights blink out. My mind filled the gap. Sleep did not come easy. Each turn of the body felt surveilled, although I knew no one stood beside me. While staring at the ceiling, waiting for release into dreams, I realized the sound had followed me. Not playback, not speaker output, but a residue. I knew if I got up and pressed play, it would be there. So it ended not in comfort, but in sharp awareness. A scratch at the back of calm. I whispered to myself, "It's nothing, just static." Reassurance sounded hollow, but I tasted relief anyway. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow I will open the file again. Tomorrow I will look closer, compare waveforms, prove there's nothing." Yet even as I spoke, curiosity edged sharper than fear. I woke with the urge to hear it again. The file sat waiting on my desktop, its pale name a small weight. My stomach curled at the thought of replay, but that only pulled me closer. I set the headphones over my ears, pressed spacebar, and let the rain return. At first, normal. A veil of drizzle, comforting, almost enough to fool me. But I knew where to listen now. I knew what lived underneath. With trembling fingers, I dropped the playback speed to half. The rain fractured as if glass spread in slow motion. Each drop lingered, breaking into long beats. And in the spaces, the hidden line pulsed forward, no longer shy. A hum that rose, then dipped, then rose again. A steady cycle that sounded too deliberate. My shoulders tightened. It was not an accident. I watched the waveform on screen thicken. What had seemed faint before now stood clear, a band pushing against noise. It hit with the weight of intention. My throat dried out while I counted silently. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, pause. Dashes and gaps, almost like code. Muscle memory from old puzzles tugged at me. I could feel patterns waiting to be unlocked. And in that moment, listening slowed. I admitted something I hadn't yet said aloud. This was not weather. Still, denial settled over me like a thin coat. I perched on explanations: electrical interference, stray radio from the apartments nearby, even a mains hum bent out of shape. But none of those held rhythm like this. Machines hum, yes. Electricity hisses, yes. But this breathed. This organized itself as though it wanted to be recognized. I pulled up my contacts list without thinking, scrolling until my finger froze. A number I hadn't dialed in years. He was retired now. Worked stations before satellite handled everything. A man who could hear signal where others shrugged static. My thumb hesitated. Then I tapped. The line rang, cracked, then picked up on the fourth tone. His voice was older, rasp worn thin, but alive. I explained fast, halting, ashamed at how shaky I sounded. I played him a segment through the receiver, rain slowed, hum pulsing. He went quiet, listening. That silence stretched long enough to seed fear. Then he spoke careful. He told me this wasn't atmospheric bleed. Said no squall produced spacing with such symmetry. Rain roars, scatters, shreds into hiss, not into breath-counted intervals. His voice hardened when I asked what it might be. Embedded transmission, he said. Keep the file safe, but do not call again with more. Then softer, don't chase it. The line went dead. Just like that. My earbuds spilled quiet where his breath had been. I sat frozen, staring at the folder. If his reaction hadn't been so sharp, I might have believed my own excuses. But he knew something he wouldn't say. That told me enough. It meant what I held wasn't nothing. I leaned back, staring at the cheap foam on my studio wall. Each square caught shadows like hatch marks. My chest pumped shallow. His warning should have closed it out, sealed the box, told me to return to ordinary nights. Instead, all it did was brand the mystery deeper. Not to pursue was impossible now. Questions crawled under my skin. Who placed this here? For what reason? And why beneath the most mundane of sounds? A simple rainfall I trusted. The hours dragged while I sat replaying pieces, comparing peaks, writing notes I barely understood. My handwriting turned crooked on the page. Pulse length, frequency range, rising bands. Every detail I thought might matter. I began seeing patterns even with my eyes closed, as if numbers and dashes floated there when I blinked. My blood raced like caffeine. Though I hadn't touched coffee. Near midnight, I saved the file to a new directory, labeled it cautiously, careful to mark the date. Fingers hesitated at delete, but I couldn't. Whatever this was, it needed to be preserved. I exported into 2 backups, one on an external drive, one on a cloud service. It felt absurd, as though I were guarding evidence in a case only I had seen. Yet the compulsion was undeniable. Walking away was fiction. The compulsion had already taken root. My ears buzzed phantom hums even in silence. I rubbed them until they stung, but the sensation remained. It would not let me be free. The warning his voice carried replayed against my memory, weighted and tired. But instead of fear, it fueled determination. People don't warn against nothing. People warn when they know weight behind the sound. I powered down the mixer and drew shades tight against the window. Outside, actual rain had returned, soft against asphalt. My brain twisted tight to see if it aligned with my recording, if the pattern waited hidden behind tonight's fall too. I did not press record. I told myself I wouldn't, not tonight at least. But I sat staring at the equipment as though expecting it to act on its own. The night ended with me hunched over the desk, eyes gritty, heart still heavy. The hum still belonged to me in a way nothing else did. No one else wanted it. No one else admitted it could be real. And yet it filled the room after silence swallowed the playback. Waiting inside the air itself, before I left the studio, I opened the file one last time, pressed the spacebar. Let the slowed rainfall wash with its pulse. I told myself it would be the final listen. Then I saved again, with deliberate care, labeling the track as if notarizing struggle into fact. Tomorrow, I promised, I would measure more carefully. I would dig until I knew not just that it was there, but why. Even if I told myself it was nothing, the deeper dive was already set in motion. Curiosity had overtaken reason, and nothing now would keep me away. I waited until the house stilled, until only the faint hum of the refrigerator kept me tethered, and then I opened my archive. Folders stacked in neat rows, months of captured rain labeled with careful dates. At first these files had been a balm. Recordings made me feel less alone. Now they loomed like sealed boxes I was afraid to open. But impulse beat hesitation. If the signal had slipped into last night's rain, maybe it wasn't new. Maybe it had been patient, hiding within all the recordings I thought belonged only to me. I started with a track from early spring. I wore headphones tight. At first, only familiar hiss. Drops scuffing the railing, wind swishing between rooftops. A comfort I half wanted to sink into. For minutes I heard nothing, my shoulders beginning to sag with relief. But as I slowed the playback by half, and then again, faint residue rose at the low end. It pulsed weak, sporadic, like bruised breath. My hand tightened around the pencil I was holding. There it was. Not in every second, not clear, but present enough to set heat across my back. I opened another file, this one marked midsummer. Again, normal rainfall, that dense sheet sound stitched with cicadas in the background. Again, the same slow prying, stretching time open. And again, the residue emerged like watermark under light, too faint to notice without intent. My scalp prickled. This was no accident. Different storms, different months, same embedded trace. My stomach flipped with the recognition. It had been hiding in plain noise all along. I wiped my palms against my jeans, but sweat had already sunk into the fabric. Each new recording I pulled reinforced the pattern. Always faint, always underneath. A hum too shy to declare itself, strong enough to endure. File after file, the residue held. I jotted timestamps, trying to organize what felt like chaos. But then I noticed something that made my hands stop cold. The spikes weren't random. They clustered along nights. I remembered all too well nights I had recorded not out of casual habit, but because sleep would not come. The weeks after my father's passing. The nights the bed felt hollow, pressing silence thick against me. It meant the rain I clung to had been more than shelter. My grief had opened the door, and the signal had walked through. A coincidence, the rational part of me whispered. I stared at the log. Date after date, each cluster marking a fissure in memory. Patterns don't lie. People try to. I could almost hear laughter under the hiss, though I knew it wasn't laughter. Just the old cursed rhythm arriving again, placing itself where my loss had been. For a moment the room blurred. I pressed my palms to my eyes, breathing deep. It wasn't just recordings anymore. It meant surveillance, a thread stitched to my pain, using it as camouflage. Comfort as cover. Weakness turned doorway. One realization pressed down on the next, building weight across my chest. I rewound a particular night 6 months before, when I had barely eaten, barely slept. That recording always carried a jagged edge, the rain accompanied by cars swishing wet asphalt. I slowed it, heart thudding. And there it was, unhidden once focused upon. A long band that swelled and shrank rhythmically. Not loud, never loud, but deliberate. My grief soaked into that night had been answered. The thought made my skin crawl. Who, or what would bother layering itself into such private noise? As notes piled, I tried detachment, the way the analyst had taught me years ago. Observe, document, avoid interpretation too soon. But my memory refused distance. Every pinpointed time was an echo of ache. I was forced to remember how I walked the apartment alone, leaving the recorder by the sill because silence screamed. I don't know what chills me more, that the signal used my weakness as doorway, or that it chose rain because it knew I would never stop listening. I leaned toward the monitor, watching the narrow valleys of the waveform. The peaks bent like someone pressing a fingertip against glass. Always soft, always undeniable once seen. The residue was not a slip of interference. It was intention, designed to slip under threshold hearing, but constant enough to weave memory against it. A watermark, yes, but sharper, like initials carved into bark. Someone left this, and left it knowing the rain would carry. A sudden noise outside car tires, splashing through a puddle, dragged me out of focus. I sat still, wondering if I had just hallucinated everything through exhaustion. I clicked mute. Silence. My heartbeat pounded so loud it felt like part of the mix. Then, unmuted again, the rain resumed, and so did the pulsing stain. Not imagined. Documented now, page after page. I forced myself to keep writing, even though my pen's grip slipped with sweat. Times, durations, faint differences between seasons. Sometimes the hum leaned higher, sometimes lower, but always regular, always precise. The farther back I went in the archive, the more dizzying the consistency became. This wasn't intrusion once, it had roots. My eyes burned. I rubbed them, whispered steady nonsense to myself. Predictable notes, predictable steps, just stay grounded. But the truth burrowed anyway. What began as comfort had shifted. All those nights replayed in my mind. The soft rain that let me rest, the tapes I trusted, now revealed as companion with hidden breath. I had invited this voice each time I pressed record, thinking the sound was mine. It had never been on my terms. When I finally pushed back from the desk, it was nearly dawn. My notes sprawled like frantic scrawl across pages. Sweat dampened my shirt, and my hands trembled too much to hold coffee. Screens glowed pale, waveforms frozen mid-scroll. I stared at them with a mix of dread and devotion. The residue had been here all along. My grief had carried it. The thought would not leave me. If it reached through pain once, what else could it anchor into? Whose hand had left it there, waiting to be heard? I drove out before dawn, the road long and without witness, mist on the highway blurring the glow of tired street lamps. The sky thickened behind me, the city shrinking in the rear mirror. I hadn't seen the analyst in years. Once, he'd been my mentor, answering my late-night calls about radio interference like puzzles worth solving. Now he was an old man who had said too much on the phone and then disappeared. Yet when I asked to meet, he agreed. His urgency made the silence between calls heavier than the words. The diner sat just off the interstate, a squat brick block with a faded green sign. The kind of place truckers favored for cheap eggs and bottomless coffee. Its lot was half empty when I pulled in. Inside, it smelled of grease, bleach, and something like mold under neon. He was already at a corner booth, face bent low, a stack of photocopies spread between salt shakers and a chipped mug. I recognized his posture before his features, the way his shoulders hunched as, if sound itself pressed on them, I slid into the seat across. He nodded but didn't offer small talk. His eyes kept flicking past me, to the windows that glared out at the parking lot. I noticed his hands too, trembling, nicotine burned between fingers that had held countless radios, countless wires. Without preface, he pushed a photocopy across the table. I looked down. Pages blurred from old scanning, stamped faintly in the corner. FOIA release 1997. My pulse quickened as I skimmed blocks of government type, phrases blacked or blurred beyond recognition. But some lines bled clear. Fragment analyses of environmental masking protocols. Notes about audio bleed reported in civilian tapes. And in his tight handwriting, circles drawn in pen around a phrase, ambient masking. He whispered the words as though reciting them still carried risk. Hidden transmissions writing natural sound, he said. Storm static, ocean surf, ventilation hum. Anything that could conceal them. For public ear, their background. For tuned reception, they're a river. He pushed another page toward me. One that described experiments in sustained exposure compliance. The phrase alone lodged in my throat. I asked if this was what I had found in my rain. His jaw tightened, and he shook his head. Whatever you heard, this, he tapped the page, was stopped decades ago. Shut down, forgotten. He slid his eyes to the door again. The emphasis wasn't comforting. It sounded like a rehearsed denial, one too well worn to believe. I held the pages tighter, careful not to tear their cheap copier paper. There was a thick block of text where the type looked struck through, almost erased. My eyes fought to piece fragments. Under controlled grief conditions. Enhanced receptivity. Baseline dependency. I closed it quickly. My skin prickled as if the text itself could see me staring. I asked why the program ended. His laugh came brittle, without joy. Officially, inefficiency. Too hard to control diffusion. Unintended anchors. Too messy. He leaned closer across the formica, breath of stale cigarettes. Unofficially well, maybe they found it wasn't theirs to control. The words almost lost themselves under the low murmur of other diners. His eyes flicked again toward the lot. Watching the arrival of a sedan that never parked near the entrance, just idled. When I tried to press, asked if what clung to my rein could be a relic of those experiments, he shook his head too fast. "Don't do this," he muttered. "Curiosity doesn't care what it costs." You won't find answers. You'll find only the next hum and the next. His words carried more fear than warning. The silence that followed hurt. The scrape of forks 2 tables away. The squeal of the coffee machine. Every sound felt like camouflage for something buried deeper. He stacked the copied pages abruptly and shoved them back into his bag. Then, as if reconsidering, he reached down, fished into his coat, and pulled out a small cassette. The label was torn, only part of a date showing. He set it on the table, then closed my hand around it with unexpected force. His grip was cold. His voice rasped at my ear. This is an old sample. Do not search. If you hear the pattern clearly, stop listening. Promise me. He held my gaze long enough that my skin prickled with shame for not answering. Promises mean nothing when curiosity gnaws. Still, I nodded. That seemed enough for him. The waitress returned with the bill, eyes bored, unaware of the weight sliding across the table under her nose. The analyst refused to stay. He stood, slid on his coat, and walked stiffly out, never looking me in the eye again. Through the window, I watched him glance twice over his shoulder before vanishing past the sedan I had seen. My heart pressed tight as though held in a fist. I sat in the booth long after, thumb rubbing the cassette's ridges. The photocopied pages smelled faintly of mold and toner, heavy with years road-blocked by hidden hands. The phrase ambient masking echoed in my head like its own transmission. Everything familiar now felt weaponized. Rain, ventilation, simple cover sounds. My comforts had been compromised long before I noticed. I shoved the cassette in my pocket, feeling its weight follow me out into the sticky air. Each droplet falling from the awning above the diner tapped like coded strokes. And as I walked to my car, I swore I could already hear the faintest pulse of what lay waiting inside that plastic shell. The cassette felt heavier than its size allowed, as if that small plastic frame carried more density than air around it. I held it in the half-light of my apartment, thumb stroking ridges worn down by someone else's fingers decades ago. One half of the label had peeled, leaving only the numbers 8 and 3 scratched in ink. 1983. That detail alone disoriented me. The diner, the analyst's trembling hand, his hurried escape now condensed into this unassuming little block. The urge to destroy it fought with the urge to hear whatever it held. And of course I knew where my body leaned before thought caught up, toward the deck. Dust clung to the old cassette deck, dormant in my closet for years. I hadn't touched it since digital made it obsolete, but I kept it like an heirloom maybe for nights just like this. Plugging the cables felt ritualistic. Each connection snapped harsh and final. I set the tape, pressed the tray closed, adjusted gain higher than usual. For seconds, I stared without hitting play. Anxiety pooled in the chest, cold fingers pressing. Then I pushed down on the worn plastic button. The hiss arrived first, a rushing blanket that smelled of time itself. Warmer than digital rain, grainier. Beneath it, soft patter unfolded rain captured on some forgotten roof 40+ years ago. My shoulders dipped, almost relieved. For a few beats it was background, nothing out of place. But then I felt it, not heard at first, something subtle pressing in on the silence between drops. The body recognizes before the ear confirms. And then it emerged. Thin, distant, but steady. A pulse. My throat closed. Heat gathered behind my face. This wasn't a one-off parasite crawled into my own recordings out of chance. It was here, buried in tape old enough to predate me. Identical structure. Rise and dip. Spaced like a language with no translation. It had cycled across decades. How many ears had brushed against this frequency and dismissed it as ordinary rain? How many never slowed the tape, never leaned in far enough, never knew what lived inside their comfort? I pressed stop, palms trembling. Sweat made the plastic slippery. My first instinct was to shove the cassette back, to claim ignorance. But refusal was impossible after recognition. I pressed play again. The hiss folded open. Soon the pulse returned, fainter but sharp now that I knew its contour by heart. It was like recognizing handwriting in darkness. Once glimpsed, it could not blend into noise again. I slowed playback, stretching time until each droplet carried its ghost. That's when the glide appeared. Not steady, not pulse, but a creeping shift in pitch, sliding under rain like a violin warming up. My stomach lurched. It tugged deep, not in ears, but in memory. Then, unmistakably, its contour formed a thread I'd known since childhood. My father, standing by my bed in the dark, humming softly to calm me. Not words. Just rise and fall, simple, repeated until breath ran dry. And here, decades and miles apart, those notes returned. I ripped the headphones off, heart hammering against ribs. My hands braced on the desk like I'd been struck. The whistle of blood in my ears felt louder than the tape, but even across the room, faintly, I still heard the glide. Impossible. It was mine alone, mine and his. A private sound, a lullaby hummed in the dark when no one else could hear. How could it have folded itself into a reel from a stranger's storm in 1983? I forced myself back, slid the headphones on with trembling hesitation, breath shallow as though preparing for a blow. Again the rain, again the glide. I closed my eyes and saw him, seated on the edge of my childhood bed, lips shaping notes humming no melody except closeness, safety. Grief coiled through me. Too much to hold, yet the signal demanded it. This was no accident. This was a hand pulling directly at that softest scar. I mumbled into the ghost air, trying to reassure myself. Coincidence, coincidence, coincidence. But coincidence does not fracture spine like that. Coincidence does not reanimate grief with such exactness. Something inside the rain had learned how to reach me. Or worse, something inside the rain had always known. I scrolled back and played the section again. The glide's timbre scratched at me, uncanny blend of human tone and mechanical distortion. Like his voice was transposed through a cracked instrument. My chest burned. I gripped the desk edge until fingernails dug grooves. I couldn't decide what frightened me more, that it was deliberate mimicry, or that it was genuinely him, carried like residue across years. Woven into rain like ashen fabric. I paused the deck, pulled the tape out. It looked so small, lightweight, fragile, like nothing could live inside. Yet as I held it, I swore the pulse continued through my fingertips. I wanted to throw it against the wall, snap its reels apart, let the stray tape tangle like entrails. But I couldn't. Fear mixed with devotion. I slid it back in, pressed play once more. This time I wrote while it played. Not notes about frequency or dashes, but words pouring as if I were recording confession. Fragments about my father, about nights long gone, about blackouts when I prayed he wouldn't leave me alone with silence. My handwriting sloped, manic, unplanned. The tape played as though feeding memory back into me, demanding testimony. At some point, I realized my lips had started to hum along. The reflex emerged unbidden, ghosting his shape of notes. I clamped my jaw shut in horror, slammed stop before I could hear myself fully blending with the residue. But the damage was done. The pattern wasn't just under my ears anymore. It had cornered the body, stitched memory to signal. I sat in the dim apartment, blinds closed, dawn creeping behind them. The cassette whirred faintly still, hungry for continuation. My grief pulsed in identical rhythm. Someone had known how to seed the sound, how to take comfort and twist it into anchor. Whoever left this had reached directly into the core of me, decades in advance, as though time itself were pliable as tape. And the worst truth of all slammed against me until breath thinned. This wasn't just data captured, cold and technical. No, it had memory. It had me. Something in this was alive enough to know precisely where to press, to remind me what I had lost, and promise it could reach me again, I kept the cassette on the desk, but didn't touch it again. Not tonight. My hands already shook enough from what it had given. Instead, I turned to the files stored on my drive, the rain captures with hum nested inside them. They felt suddenly poisonous, yet I opened them anyway. Because I couldn't stop. The analyst's warning rattled in memory, but warnings only feed obsession. The software came from him too, though indirectly. A disk slipped into an envelope years ago now seemed like planted insurance. Spectrum analysis, dated but functional. I installed it on the old desktop in the corner. When the screen finally blinked awake, grids and frequency colors filled the dark apartment. Rows of numbers bled into each other. My pulse slowed to a mechanical thud as my fingers loaded the file. The rain filled in first wide sweeps across the bottom. A heavy carpet of noise, glowing muted blue. Familiar, almost soothing. But then higher up, running parallel, faint striations appeared. Lines at angles, jagged edges drawn with invisible chalk. They looked sharp even in digital haze. And when I shifted contrast, they lit like threads woven through storm. The hum no longer hid. It declared. I twisted the parameters. Time on one axis, pitch on the other. The band stretched across, recurring at nearly perfect intervals, then breaking, then repeating anew. This wasn't weather's randomness. This was design. My chest tightened as though breath could not keep pace with what eyes confirmed. I nudged the view, rotated the whole spectrogram sideways. For a second, chaos. But with another tilt, the picture seemed to hold. An image. Not letters, not words. Angles, structures, lines nested into each other until they resembled the skeleton of a doorway. A child's crude drawing of an entrance, scrawled however light could permit. Yet no matter how I squinted, the feeling rose the same, a frame. A door diagram sketched in static dot, the air shifted behind me. I spun in the chair. Nothing, just dark apartment edges, blinds drawn, silence thick. But now silence felt pointed. Like the room knew I had seen too much. I turned back to the monitor, heart climbing. Every new playback confirmed the same looming symbol. Rain became skeleton, morphing water into geometry. I recorded my own voice, whispering what I saw, and fed it into the program against the rain. My words vanished, swallowed by waveforms, yet the bands around the doorway remained untouched. It was stronger than overlay, immune to interference, stitched into the spine of the file. Whoever left it had worked with obsession. Whatever intention, it bent sound against itself until the message couldn't die. I reached for my phone, thumb fumbling through contacts, searching his number. The analyst. The man who once steadied my curiosity with reason. It rang once, then stuttered into disconnect. Tried again, twice more, each time the same hollow end. I stared at the black screen until my reflection floated there, pale and distraught, and knew he had pulled away. Or been pulled, my body leaned toward the playback again anyway. Each loop thickened the image, made it lake clear. The more I studied, the more I felt it unfold forward, as if depth bled from flatness. The frame did not sit still. It suggested motion. An opening hung ajar. Every bone in my body throbbed with knowing. This was not supposed to be static. This was transition captured halfway. My finger hovered at pause, but I never pressed. When at last I stopped, nausea rolled heavy. I swallowed the bile down, sat shivering. My notes sprawled across the desk, incoherent now. I couldn't capture what the eye saw or what the chest felt. The human language didn't fit it. It didn't ask for name. It demanded entrance. I reached the brink where loneliness felt worse than dread. I needed verification beyond myself. Against better reason, I thought of the technician I trusted. A man I'd worked with long enough to know he had ears for anomalies, patience for unraveling signals. He was rational to the bone, the kind who could cut delusion from real. Maybe he could anchor this spiraling. Maybe by sharing it, I'd learn whether I had drowned too far. I exported a segment. Titled it Bland, something low risk. Sent it encrypted to his inbox with only a brief note. Take a look. Tell me if I'm losing it. My pulse slammed as the file uploaded. The instant it left me, I regretted it. I imagined the doorway traveling with it, carried quietly through the network wires, ready to etch itself into any screen it touched. Too late now. Sentiment spread. I closed the program, but the afterimage clung to eyelids. Thin, angular frame burned behind vision when eyes shut. A door built out of persistence. I rubbed them harder, but it remained. My palms shook. My head ached. The analyst had abandoned contact. The cassette hissed faint on the desk, as if hungry for attention. And somewhere out there, another pair of eyes on another lit screen would soon trace the same geometry. The same invitation. Fear overtook me as I imagined his reply. He called late. Voice breaking through static in a way that instantly told me he hadn't slept. His first words carried no greeting. "It's live," he said. Too blunt, too certain. The phrase pierced through me sharper than warning. I asked him to explain, but his breathing steadied instead. A forced patience that felt rehearsed against panic. "Your recording isn't a container," he said. "It's a channel. Something opens when you run it." I stared at the screen as if it could answer for him. He went on, "The file reacts to your space." I checked the spectrogram again. When I tapped my pen against my desk, I saw shadow spikes bloom inside your rain file in the same interval. Like it knew. Like it mirrored. I didn't tell you right away. I thought maybe corruption, maybe bleeding hardware. But I had to check further. So we tested again. He cleared his throat low, like it scraped him to speak. "Do this for me. Hit play. Let the rain run." I did, headphones already clamped like a vice to my skull. Water poured tinny through the speakers. Familiar. I thought I was ready until he said, "Now wait for it." A second later, my radiator gave its usual sharp click, the sound of metal cooling. Instantly, faint but visible, my display spiked at the exact millisecond. A bloom lifted inside the rain's wall. Spectral flares responding, as though they had been waiting for that sound. My hand froze on the mouse. He whispered, almost apologetic, "That's not possible with a static file." I stared harder, desperate for plausible flaws. Crosstalk from the sound card? Erratic buffer? My thoughts scrambled lines of explanation, but each fell flat under the sight of mirrored resonance. The radiator click had no microphone line into the file, it simply existed in my space. Yet somehow it planted itself inside playback, stitched into rainfall that had already been captured long before. The feeling when I saw it, both exhilaration and terror. I said his name once, wanting him to pull me back. Instead, he sighed sharp through the line. "Do you understand? It's not just embedded code from decades ago. It's right in you now. Your room, your presence. When you play it, it's not you hearing the signal, it's the signal hearing you back." That sentence left a thickness in my throat, too massive to swallow. My apartment shuddered faintly as if the pipes had groaned at the same time. On the screen, a bloom flared brighter, then shrank to nothing. The hair along my neck rose, as though touched. I felt myself no longer external observer, but trapped participant. That meant every tick of movement, every catch of breath could be recorded into an ever-growing layer I didn't consent to, but couldn't deny. I told him in broken stammers that I wanted to stop. Pull the plugs. Erase contact. Destroy the cassette. He cut across me, calm but grim. "You could try. But the moment you engaged, it threaded you in. You may stop the files, but you can't stop what already copied through. It's woven." His resignation hollowed out every chamber of my chest. We listened together in silence as rain spilled steady. The longer it poured, the more slight anomalies I spotted in the spectrum. Tiny lifts where none should be. Rhythms aligning too tight to coincidence. At one point, I snapped my fingers near the desk. A bloom mirrored back inside the rainfall seconds later, pulsed faint, then faded. Its delay felt like a creature teased to react, but refusing to reveal itself whole. I whispered into the line, asking him what he thought this meant. His pause dragged so long I thought the call had broken. Then his voice clutched through, low and taut. It means you're inside their architecture now. Whoever built it, whatever it was, it isn't passive. It consumes input and writes it downstream. If you stay in too long, you could disappear piece by piece, and only the echo will remain. The words rattled my teeth. For the first time, I thought about leaving the room physically, as if space could break tether. I stood and crossed to the far wall. The radiator clicked faint behind me again, unaware of the havoc it triggered. My display showed another flare appear, obedient as shadow. I nearly sobbed in disbelief. There was no leaving this room, not in the way I meant. He tried to soothe me with steady tone. Don't obsess on the why tonight. If you do, it will chew you raw. Focus on containment for now. Limit playback. Keep files offline. Physical gaps help, even if temporary. His advice clattered hollow. My eyes were locked on the image of the pulse blooming like fungus each time my world shifted minuscule. Even then, under ration and warning, I heard in his voice a fracture. He wasn't immune either. He'd seen what I had sent, and now he carried the afterimage too. There was no reversing that. We both knew. His own apartment would now hum with phantom residues. He would never again hear silence as silence, just like me. My lips felt dry. I tried to ask how. He cut me off. I don't know, and I don't want to. But it means this isn't just sound. It doesn't end where you think it does. His voice fell lower. Every time I talk about it, my phone starts clicking. At first I thought interference, cell towers. But it's real. Every time the rain band is mentioned aloud, I get that old hollow tap in the receiver, like a line being shared. I tested last night. Spoke about random topics, clear. Said the word rain, clear. Said the word hum, clear. But the moment I mentioned frequency spacing, he paused. Clicks, right on cue. Always clicks. The thought lodged like rust in my lungs. I tried offering rational scaffolding: systemic error, data virus, line monitoring by ISP. He ignored me. His voice climbed tighter, urgent as a man closing doors, one by one. Don't rationalize this. Just end it. Drop everything. Pack the tapes. Delete your drive. Go back to ordinary background loops, the commercial kind. Play those until you forget how this sounded. If you keep pressing, something will write itself into you that you can't delete later. He wanted me to surrender. His words trembled, but behind them was genuine fear, a fear of infection from knowledge itself. He pressed again. Stop the experiment. Bury it. Forget it. The problem was my nights had already gone wrong beyond burying. I told him, voice low, shame filling me even as I confessed. Last night, there was interference new to me. Not the hum, not the whistle. Deeper under the rainfall. At first muffled, like static trying to form. I thought it was another cascade waiting. But then, I faltered. He waited for me to speak. I whispered it. I heard myself. He went silent. I thought the call had severed. Then his quiet curse broke through. I pushed faster, desperate to finish now that I'd begun. It wasn't a full phrase. Not anything coherent. Just a broken syllable. But it was shaped in my own voice. I recognized the throat grain, the pitch. I never recorded it. Not once. Yet it sat there between drops as if sampled. Like something listened and copied back a warped imitation. Even for him, patience snapped. His tone lost any scientific veil. That's it. Do not play it again. Do not touch it. Once it echoes you, it has you. That's when it owns part of your pattern. You need to sever whatever ties remain. But his desperation only stressed the impossible line. It wasn't something I could sever. Once an echo exists, you can't unmake it. The whistle predicted my wake times, the blooms mirrored my world, and now the signal borrowed my voice. What else lay waiting in its library, lifting from me when I least noticed? He begged again, stumbling into words that lost their cohesion. Forget the bands. Forget the archives. Forget the analyst. This isn't our ground to explore. The further you go, the less you'll return. I kept my own voice softer, calmer, because I didn't want him to hear how my fingers shook while writing notes. Even as he pled, I wrote down time codes, sketches of the pulse. Fragments of memory distorted inside the downpour dot we hung up badly. His breathing sharp into the mic before the line cut, like someone prying the phone from his hands mid-cry. I sat for long minutes staring at the notebook, pencil trembling, staring at the scribbled note, my own voice inside. The words burned. I replayed the file slowly, volume low, flinching before the moment approached. Under the curtain of water, static unwound and they're broken, cracked open, half a word my voice returned to me. Just enough to seal recognition, never enough to deny. Too alive to dismiss, too incomplete to explain. My mouth went dry as I pressed my ear tighter to confirm. There was no escaping it. In that breathless hour before dawn, I knew my friend's warning could not uproot what the signal had already planted. He could run, erase drives, burn wires down to copper slag. But I had been sampled, and the system does not give back what it collects. I had been circling fragments for weeks, layering hums against whistles, pulses against my own broken syllable. They spread across notebooks like evidence boards without pins, only my restless hand connecting them with arrows and slanted scrawl. One night I realized the pieces might not be separate at all. Each noise, different in shape, aligned on its own timeline. But when stacked across the same span they fell into lattice dot. It was like a lock combination. Hums steady, low. Whistles cascaded in intervals. Pulses acting as anchors at predictable ticks. And the voice fragment of me, repeated, ghost breath hidden under. Alone each layer irritated. Together they twisted into arrangement. For the first time, the chaos pretended to be order. I pinned up sheets across the wall, overlapping graphs of frequency. Alone, paper meant little, but in composite they resembled woven mesh. Tight squares bending at corners, lattice crumbling into form. I stared half the night while the radiator clanged behind me, my heartbeat counting off spaces between lines. I whispered that it couldn't be coincidence. Nothing this precise repeats across decades without design. Sleep abandoned me. Instead, I started mixing them digitally, laying files atop one another. The rain of 1983, the cassette with faint pulse. My recent captures laced with whistle, all staggered until their cycles cinched. At first, just layered chaos. But when I made minute adjustments, something happened. The bands began to open, aligning in patterns like tumblers clicking into place. A lattice indeed, rotating in spectral space, pivoting like a lock on the verge of release. At 3 a.m, tired past coherence, I pressed play on the composite file. The speakers filled with rainfall, denser than usual, until subtle forms pressed through it. The hum bent down like breath. The whistle cut a corridor through silence. Pulse flared, embedding beats like markers. And then, new sound leaked free. It wasn't worded, not language, but audible presence distinct from rain. A rising swell like wind tearing through abandoned tunnels, bright and metallic, yet fluid. It pressed into the room in a way recorded sounds are never meant to. Weight pushed against arms, hair lifting with static. My chest seized. It felt alive, leaving a glow in the body. The swell expanded, brightened, then folded, as though what had been buried behind rain now surged outward. For a second, I swore the rainfall bent back, peeled open like curtains. Noise parted, and through it shimmered something beyond. Not place, not light. A sense of elsewhere, cold and demanding. The rain no longer background, but frame opening into what it concealed, a door. That word carried itself into me uninvited. I whispered it, like confession. A door had been carved hidden in audio, waiting for alignment, waiting for someone like me to turn the lock long enough. And here it groaned open, just enough to steal breath. I staggered back from the desk, but didn't cut playback. My body refused coherence. The glow increased with each passing second, overwhelming sound itself. The tunnel swell drew higher until fillings in my teeth buzzed faint. The ceiling light flicked not in rhythm with power surges, but in rhythm with the spectral lattice. I stared wide-eyed at walls that seemed closer, like pressure bent them inward, and then cut, abrupt, quicker than power out, quicker than switch flick. The noise emptied all at once, leaving rain again, ordinary hiss, nothing spectacular. My chest pounded hollow. The room sat dim and calm, but the aftertaste in air remained iron tang, hair still standing. I turned off everything and sat in dark silence. My breath sounded not like mine but borrowed. In that moment, I knew I had not imagined any of it. If I had edited wrong, nothing would have lined. But aligned right, the door opened, and the system revealed intention. All my earlier suspicions about being watched, mirrored, sank beneath a much greater truth. Not just observation, invitation. I didn't record the sensation. I didn't need to. My body trembled with memorized proof. It wasn't just about losing sleep anymore, or suffering phantom hums. I had unlocked what they built, what they left. Sentences from the analyst's weathered photocopies rushed up the talk of ambient masking, transmissions under sound. Those fragments had been seeds of locks. I had turned them. For half an hour I sat staring at the powered, down screen. My reflection sagged back at me, pale and aged. I whispered again, door, trying to taste weight of the word. Nothing answered except old water trickling from pipes, mocking with resonance. Yet underneath, my bones swore something on the far side listened back. I wanted to call the technician, to tell him I had seen it happen, but shame stopped me. He had begged me to stop. If I admitted the experiment continued and rewarded me, he might cut me off entirely, or worse, repeat my mistake and suffer break that couldn't be undone. Even so, I saved the composite, labeled it simple as protection, Rain Mix 10. A name dull enough to disguise what it really was. Sleep never came after. Each blink pulled with memory of rainfall folding open. Each faint gust outside window made me shake, expecting that bright swell to knot air together once more. My walls had kept me safe for years, but tonight I didn't trust them. Behind sound lay a place without boundary, and I had handles for unlocking it. When dawn's first light rimmed the blinds, I realized something horrifying. The whistle didn't wake me that night. It didn't need to. I woke naturally, without prodding, because I was beyond watching now. I had unlocked the lattice. For 1 second, the door had opened. The night after the lattice opened, everything in my apartment felt wrong. When I walked through the door, I expected familiarity, but instead the air seemed thickened, clinging to skin as though charged. Ordinary devices acted like they knew something had changed. The small radio on the shelf blipped awake on its own, spilling half-formed signals before flicking back to silence. No hands touched it, no timers set. It wasn't malfunction. It was intrusion carried into circuitry. I tried to dismiss coincidence. Old hardware cracks. But then my condenser mic, disconnected from playback, began showing spikes. The red meters jittered high while no one sat near them, as if pressure in the room alone pressed against capsules. Watching them flare without sound made my stomach twist. The gear I had once trusted as neutral witness now behaved like accomplice. I shut everything off. Darkness behind screens brought no calm. I sat in my chair and let silence pour in, hoping absence might numb me. But quiet betrayed me too. In silence I heard sympathetic echoes. Faint hums blooming in walls, vent shafts carrying low resonances that rose sharp whenever my heart raced. The apartment seemed to mimic me now, each breath paired by tone, each shift mirrored by subtle vibration. I tried covering ears with hands, but vibration does not end where skin clamps closed. It pushed through skull bone. A subtle buzz like a hidden motor lingered, ebbing off when I sat still, rising when I stirred. It meant stillness purchased brief reprieve, but life itself movement, heartbeat summoned reply. My space had become participant. At 2 in the morning I snapped on the radio by choice, desperate for noise to overwrite the endless mimicry. Static washed the room clean for a beat, but soon distortion carved into it, a shrill whistle not unlike the recorded cascades. It modulated up and down with no station, no anchor, a false broadcast constructing itself through speaker cone. I yanked the plug from socket. Radio went black. The whistle didn't. It whispered faintly on, now riding the pipes rather than wires, bleeding through drywall as though permanence had been achieved. Even the rain betrayed me. Comfort gone. When I attempted to play the oldest loop I owned, my favorite blanket of white hiss, it didn't arrive soothing. Instead, it carried agitation, edges sharpened, timbre no longer neutral. I heard presence inside it, restless, climbing. It turned what once held me into cage wire, strumming against nerves. I resisted for nights, testing life without recordings. Silence should have brought relief. Instead, silence spawned restless hums. It felt like withdrawal symptom, like the body demanding drug. But the truth was worse. Silence was not absence. Silence now carried continuation. I logged the tones, appalled to see parallels. Frequencies matched those buried under rain tracks. The signal had leached off file into life. No more line between environment and archive. Unnerved, exhausted, I tried final lifeline. I called the analyst. My voice felt weak as it broke into voicemail, then stronger when no answer came. I called again, numbers clicking into cold disconnect notice. The system didn't flick me to messaging this time. It severed with blunt cut. I tried again, third time like ritual. Again, flat tone. His number was gone. It didn't feel like accident or retirement. It felt like erasure. I sat in dark kitchen, phone still in hand, pulse hammering. My only source of guidance had vanished, leaving me dangling inches above abyss. The technician remained, but even he edged toward collapse. Alone in the shrill apartment, I realized there was no one left to draw me back to Earth. And still, the environment pressed further. Cupboard doors creaked faintly though no draft moved. Radiator pipes clanged not in random settling, but in sync with my movements, responding to a pattern. When I muttered aloud, sharp consonants rebounded as metallic ticks, like answer code constructed in iron. Every gesture I made carried shadow echo across the frame of the room. This was no longer intrusion hidden behind screens. My space itself had been recruited. I pulled notebooks close, tried to repurpose fear into data. Measurements of meter spikes at idle, notations on hum intensities in various corners. But notation gave no ground. Phenomena erupted at will, not on command. Data log turned into diary, then into confession. My handwriting grew jagged like breath broken. In margins I wrote the words irreversible slip. That phrase stuck, repeating against my teeth each time silence bloomed. I kept replaying the swell in memory, the bright wind tunnel that had poured through composite file. My body recognized it even when absent. My scalp flared at phantom echoes, reminding me I had pushed the lock too far. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was crossing. Something had heard me. The lattice responded not in abstract but in physical, undeniable impression. I can't shake the sense that my apartment isn't mine anymore. Walls lean closer. Air is never still. Rain can't soothe and silence won't save. The analyst is gone, unreachable. The technician falters. And me, I feel myself edging toward final point where return is impossible. I decided to end it. Not postpone, not pause, but erase. I woke before sunrise with that resolve thick in my chest, the kind that feels like anger, but is only fear in harder clothing. I sat at the desk and stared at the library of files stacked across folders, each title bland, each one carrying infection. For a full minute my hand hovered over the mouse. Then, with a half shout to myself, I dragged them all into the bin. Delete. Confirm. The sound of the empty chime rang thin as conscience. I didn't trust digital's pretend ritual. So I unplugged the drives, carried them to the sink, drowned them under scalding water until their casings warped. Still not enough. The tapes stacked in shoeboxes looked back at me, plastic spines like teeth. I pulled them out one by one, smashed reels under hammer until magnetic strips whined like dry leaves. The deck, once shrine of my nights, I tore cables free, slammed it against tile until the wood split and circuits spilled. I stood amid wreckage, chest heaving like battle finished, but silence didn't follow. My apartment carried the hum as steadily as before, almost prouder now that machines had been reduced. Through vents a static drift coiled, louder when I pressed my palms against drywall. The floorboards faintly shivered. Rain without sky seeped across ceiling beams. I crouched, shut eyes, begged for stillness. Instead, low tones leaked back in. Erasure had meant nothing. I left the apartment. I thought that would matter. Out on the empty street, no headphones, no equipment trailing, night air crisp and untainted. But as I walked past brick walls glistening with dew, I caught it again, pulse faint under traffic. A steady rhythm hidden beneath sparrows, as if the city's own body admitted to carrying it. My chest tightened. Escape through distance meant little when contamination lived inside sensory nerves. I ransacked notebooks, ripped pages filled with diagrams. I flushed shards into trash, but the words themselves had already sunk too deep, etched under skull. Close your eyes and you see waveforms. Plug ears and you feel vibration under skin. Supposed silence only confirms its grip. Sleep struck worse. Dreams brought storms I couldn't outrun. In each dream, downpours thicker than any weather I'd known hammered ground into rivers. With each drop, pulses throbbed time to heartbeat. My perspective toggled between sky spilling water and earth drowning beneath it. In those moments, I couldn't remember if I was dreaming or replaying files, but my body woke drenched in sweat, jaw aching from clench. I tried meditations, breath counts, hums of my own voice to mask it. But even relaxation became mimicry. The signal folded into my rhythms like shadow dancer, doubling every exhale, bending each hum into alignment. I had become unwilling collaborator. The act of trying to erase had sewn connection deeper. I felt like rat chewing its leg free only to gnaw the chain tighter. By third day of purge, exhaustion hollowed me. I sat on couch with walls bare, shelves stripped, equipment husks piled by door, daring silence to return. My ears rang. I prayed that ring was only blood pressure. But beneath it, faint drizzle hissed though sky outside stayed crisp, clear. There was no weather. Still, rainfall whispered from nowhere, carrying pulse with it. I shut windows, stuffed towels under doors. It remained. The realization cut final. The sound doesn't live in devices. It lives in me, seeded through exposure already too long sustained. I don't need speakers. My nerves host enough resonance to replay endlessly, without switch or dial. Like phantom limb but whole. Each room now answers body. Each dream closes circle dot. It no longer matters that I destroyed drives. When I breathe, sound breathes with me. When I sleep, storm follows eyelids, syncing its cadence to my body clock. I told myself abandon would save me, but abandon revealed truth. This was never about equipment. It was about relationship to listening. Through listening, I gave it vessel. Through listening, I allowed it permanence. I tell myself surrender could still hold power. If I give in, if I stop resisting, perhaps it will ease its grip. Yet even surrender feels predetermined, like choice carved into me before recognition. Days stretch thin. Nights collapse. Silence does not belong to me anymore. The act of listening has bound me. Every attempt at sever has only proved the chain hidden, not broken. And lying in bed tonight, pulse sinking against phantom rain, I know the attempt at silence has failed. The package arrived without fanfare. No stamp, no return address, only slid through the mail slot in a plain sleeve scorched faintly at one edge. I held it like it might still smolder. The smell of burned plastic clung to its surface, acrid, unmistakable. Inside was a single disc, black, reflective, handwritten number 13, scribbled on its face in silver marker. Nothing else. My stomach tightened. Deliveries don't appear without source. Someone knew this building. Someone knew me. I paced the apartment carrying it, debating destruction on the spot. Snap it in half, crush it under heel, dump shards down the chute. But hesitation won, as it always did. Fear wound itself into curiosity and dragged me to the desk. My old player blinked awake, tray sliding out with a breathy sigh. I slid the disc in. Even as it spun, my throat tightened. The act felt irreversible. The first sound was ordinary rainfall. Spattering against pavement, hollow echoes in storm tunnels. A sound I recognized not only by ear, but by geography. This was from my neighborhood. I knew the corner slope of the street, the smear of runoff sounding against low gutters, the echo inside a nearby stairwell cast in watery reverb. Whoever recorded this had been close at first. It almost comforted. Recognition stroking nerves dulled raw. Then the layer beneath tore through. Not soft like old hums, not faint like residue watermark. This one clawed, a sharp embedded signal lurching against the rainfall. It grabbed attention by force, repelling the ear while demanding focus. My chest tightened. The pulses formed pattern quickly. Not random, not ornamental. A call tone. It rose high, dropped low, rigid spacing like locator beacons. Ping, pause, ping. My fingers clenched seat edge. The message was blunt. Attention, here, find. The way sonar signals direction. The way emergency broadcasts demand acknowledgement. This wasn't passive resonance hiding in ambient static. This was sharp enough to hook marrow dot and worst. It oriented. I traced intervals, measuring instinctively. The calls didn't spread vague. They narrowed. Angles cut sharper until the direction pointed not outward into void, but downward into my map, my very coordinates. The realization stung. These weren't guiding anyone elsewhere. They were guiding straight to me. I leaned back hard, headphones half slipping. My body wanted distance, but the tone pulled closer. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps coincidence. The local recording simply carried line noise from a ham operator nearby. A beacon spill across neighborhood bands. But denial didn't hold. The tone hit exact spacing, matched across earlier spectrograms I'd saved. This was built by the same hand. The same architecture, now targeting different layer, not general cover, but tailored arrow. Hands slicked with sweat, I pulled notebook open, sketched intervals. Perfect sequence repeated 6 times before mutating into double beat. An address, I thought. Not literal street, but an identifier encoded the symbol. 6, then a double, marking me as recipient. No need for translation. Pattern alone proved it, knew me, singled me. My mouth dried. I let file run longer, praying resolution would falter, that strength might decay. But no, its gain climbed. Each ping louder, rainfall folding weaker around it. Command presence growing as storm diminished. Like language forcing nature aside, so only directive remained. You are designated. You are here. The sensation shifted from listening to being pinned. My eyes darted toward walls, expecting presence. Shadows pooled thicker in corners, though lamps burned steady. I slammed stop button at last, breath ragged, but too late. The sound lingered. After pressure shimmer in ears like someone striking tuning fork against bone. I tore disc from tray. Its reflective surface looked warped by flame long before it reached me. Edges bubbled from previous fire. Why send nearly destroyed artifact? Unless to warn me they can scorch and still survive. To show futility of trying to burn my way free. I thought of smashed tapes, deleted drives, all worthless once messages multiplied by those who carry master keys. Whoever they are, they didn't need subtlety. They moved from hiding inside general reign to direct instruction. Look here. Hear him. I placed disc on desk and backed away like it might crawl. Something had shifted coreward. This wasn't passive infection anymore. It was targeted. Someone knew me, not abstractly, not by accident. Me personally. My identity had weight in this construct. My mind spiraled questions. Why select me? Because I listened? Because grief weakened me enough to let signal stitch through? Had I volunteered by obsession, or was I marked years before without knowledge? The thought bit most. The lullaby cadence I heard earlier, the mimic of my father's hum. Too precise to be accident. Maybe selection came not by me but through legacy bloodlines charted by resonance, voices cataloged before I knew to guard them. I held the disc again, afraid, desperate. Tiny ridges under fingertips felt like scar, ridged thin and melted. A burned file sent as bait, knowing my compulsion could never destroy it unread. Whoever orchestrated this wanted my ear, wanted to root themselves deeper by direct offering. The pings echoed memory, even in absence. They resounded through my living room like phantom notification, ghost beacons repeating inside nerves. My jaw clenched hard enough to ache. My head bowed heavy. Someone had opened the game into personal strike. I stared at the stack of wreckage I'd thought might save me. Drives warped, tapes smashed, futile. I hadn't escaped. I'd only cleared space for this arrival. The disk proved burn won't erase binding. Transmission persists even through destruction. The architecture of sound thrives on its own ash. I wanted to scream. Instead I whispered, quiet, plea meant for no one. Why me? The apartment swallowed echo and the hum thread swelled up fluid, carrying sane cadence back. And in the thick stillness, after I realized the question mattered less than fact of targeting. Whoever sent the burned file knew exactly who I was. They had tailored the rain's pings to mark me as endpoint in their equation. Not random civilian. Not abstract receiver. Me, precise. And the question pressed in with crushing weight. Not just who, but why I had been chosen at all. It didn't take long before I realized the net had widened. Not through phones, not from agencies, but through the scattered corners of the internet where sleepless people gather. Insomniacs comparing remedies, addicts looping white noise to quiet the skull. In one of those forums, buried under endless chatter about pillow types and headphones, I saw the first mention. A user described the background hum they couldn't ignore. Said it lived under storm tracks they had bought online, pulsing steady, impossible to unhear once noticed. I scrolled faster, heart knocking. Another thread. Same hum, same complaint, slightly different words. A third, blatant. Anyone else hear the breathing under rain audio? Does it keep pace with you? That sentence felt like cold water poured down my back. These weren't just coincidences. They matched my descriptions too hard. The lattice wasn't mine alone anymore. Videos started appearing next. Amateurs recording clips of playback on cheap phones, posting to share their unease. At first, nothing more than hiss. Then I heard it low-tone threaded beneath. Distorted by shaky speakers, yes, but intact enough for ear to catch. Others slowed files down, uploaded spectral views. And in grainy screenshots of their software, I saw it. The same angular diagrams I thought belonged only to me. Jagged lines aligning into crude frames, like doorways scrawled in light. I sat hunched over my monitor, scrolling until my vision blurred. Each new post punched deeper. People in places I'd never seen. Canada, Japan, Brazil described the exact phantom phenomena mapped in my notebooks. My private virus had leapt oceans. Either the signal had scaled, infiltrating servers that hosted white noise tracks worldwide, or we had been planted with the same hallucination. My body couldn't decide which answer chilled worse. Threads filled with argument. Some mocked, others confessed secret dread. Many shrugged it off as pareidolia, brains inventing order in chaos. That word repeated across comments like a defensive chant. But inside the static of replies came bodies like mine. Those who swore it wasn't imagination, and posted waveforms as proof. I downloaded 3 separate clips from strangers. Played them, eyes fixed on spectrogram. All 3 blazed the same lattice when aligned. Identical lock tumblers falling into place. Regardless of who recorded or where, I leaned back, palms cold. This wasn't my grief alone generating pattern. The circle rippled wide, spreading from central drop to countless ears. That made me less special, but also more endangered. If many had found the door, then doorway wasn't accident. It had been seeded, repeated, distributed. Awareness expanding day by day. Each member drawn further just like me. I searched back through older threads, combing archives. Mentions existed years before under vague titles. Odd harmonics and storm sound loops. Unexplained tones in ambient apps. Always scattered, easily ignored. But then density spiked the last months. The wave had intensified, scaled. Silence no longer contained its servers hosting rain tracks had become infected libraries, broadcasting frameworld to anyone who sought comfort in rainfall. That was millions. When realization struck, anger followed. My grief, once weakness, now twisted sharp into urgency. Others were being dragged through the same door I cracked. If I had fallen because of pain, what chance did unsuspecting strangers have? Already in the forums they spoke of disrupted sleep, waking with pulses beating behind ribs, dreams filled with rushing water. I recognized the descent. Soon they'd stop laughing. Soon they'd be unable to pull out. I tried intervening. Posted under a cloak of anonymity, warning them to delete files, to avoid playing storm generators. Some scoffed instantly. Others said they had tried and failed, that even after erasing libraries, echoes remained. Reading their words was like staring into mirrors of myself. Their denial crumbled as mine had. They were caught. The widening circle had no break. In a grim moment, I sampled their clips, layered them alongside mine. Mixed globally dispersed files on top of each other. And yet, astonishingly, the lattice strengthened. The spectrogram frame grew clearer, sharper at edges, as though scattering source only concentrated shape further. Instead of noise diverging across countries, each one contributed piece toward a unified whole. So what was left? Either a worldwide infiltration locked in natural disguise, or a hallucination so strong and contagious, it mutated across strangers in synchrony. My rational brain clung to the latter, muttered words like mass suggestion. But my chest rejected it. Hallucination doesn't map the same geometric frame across different storm samples, made by different hands in different decades. That requires design. I shut down the monitor, but its glow lived behind eyelids. The whispers of grief, the lullaby tone copied from my father's hum, morphing into something bigger than blood, bigger than my own cracked nights. Others heard it now, which meant responsibility spilled onto me. If I had gone further, if I had opened tumblers, then perhaps I was already further down than anyone else. That made me unwilling guide a miner, who collapsed a tunnel but returned shouting warning to those outside. I cradled my face in trembling hands and whispered promises into empty air. If I didn't act, others would be dragged through. Children pressing play to sleep easier might find lattice blooming before rest. The sick and sad and lonely would become vessels. Sleep itself converted to corridor. Soon half the world might find rain reshaped into door. Duty bit deeper than fear then. My grief had pulled me in, but maybe grief could sharpen resolve too. I couldn't save myself from binding, but perhaps I could mark trail for others. Slam signs across forums, whisper truths hidden in redactions. My hands trembled, but I typed. The widening circle did not belong solely to dread. My voice could carry warning into ripple, even if drowned later. I don't know if it matters. Streams keep uploading, files keep circulating, listeners keep aligning tumblers without knowing. The hum spreads silent, the whistle waits in lull. But I can no longer pretend it is hallucination limited to me. It is global, scaled, seated. The circle is widening, and through it, countless will stumble toward a half-open door I already stepped through. The first rolls of thunder reached me before sunrise, shaking through the thin glass. I sat up with nerves already burning because storms were never innocent anymore. When the weather turned raw, I no longer thought of calm nights or rhythmic sleep. I thought of lattice pulses, whistles folded under rainfall. Tonight I didn't even hesitate. I pulled open the drawer, lifted portable recorders, checked their red lights flicking steady. If the intrusion lived inside synthetic files, what would it do with nature itself? Outside the air felt swollen, heavy. Clouds pressed low across rooftops, lit faint from city glow. The storm gathered fast, wind carrying a metallic chill, as though the sky charred itself before the strike. I crouched near the stairwell, raised mics pointed upward, waiting. One breath later, the sky broke. Rain fell fierce and sudden, hammering concrete like a wall collapsing into drops. Headphones filled with roar and hiss, so thick it blurred. Thought at first it felt purely environmental. Then a familiar unease threaded through. Beneath roar sat low hum I recognized from every file I had ever analyzed. My heart stopped, restarted heavy. Nature itself aligned with embedded band, overlapped seamless, indistinguishable. Rain had become mask and host in one breath. My knees weakened in fear. This wasn't signal riding through captured playback. This was live atmosphere bending lockstep with architecture of design. I adjusted gain, terrified, but unable to stop. Waveforms spiked wild. Drops exploded across microphones, each one carrying not random scatter but measured cadence. Between rattles lived the pulse regular, mechanical, certain. My stomach tightened into rope, gag reflex rising. Environment was gone. This was system in pure form. A flash tore sky open. Lightning shattered through headphones, not as crackle but as static arc, hiss folding into perfect peaks across spectrum. I gasped, pulling headphone half free, but even through air alone it struck bone. Each bolt bent sound against architecture, as though thunder had been repurposed into coded carrier. The storm was not a backdrop. It was a relay, alive with instruction. I shut my eyes hard, listened more than saw. Rain sheets whiplashed against rooftops. Yet under it, distinct patterns organized, boxy repetitions like scan sweeps, high whistles cascading. No longer faint, they were dominant. I wasn't analyzing a file anymore. I stood inside one. Every sensation screamed truth. Nature itself carried code. Hands trembled as I held recorders steady, red lights blinking frantic under droplets. I thought of early warnings in FOIA pages, The analyst whispering, ambient masking. He had known, perhaps all along, that environment would be ultimate host. His silence, his vanish, wasn't cowardice, it was knowledge that such infiltration was never meant to be revealed. My breath fogged sharp as realization locked down spine. This isn't accident, isn't glitch. Storm fronts have been engineered into relays across decades. Global water cycle turned transmitter. Lightning turned arc generator. Storms carrying same door lattice woven into home recordings. It transcended devices, transcended tape, clawed into sky and earth itself. The sound grew unbearable. Patches of rainfall amplified against walls, whines spiraling until ears buzzed. I turned dials low, desperate not to lose audio completely, but forced to shrink volume before it broke me. Even then, body vibrated in sympathy. Each pulse rattled teeth. Each flash bent nerves. I stumbled back under awning, gear clutched like shield. But distance didn't mute it. The storm wrapped building to building, funneling resonance tighter. It knew no gear limit. Control had ended not in my apartment, but in entire weather system. I stared across soaked street, lightning bleaching wet pavement, thunder shaking marrow. Between thunder peaks the lattice revealed clearest yet. Intervals aligned with unnatural perfection. My grief once convinced me signal fed on weakness. Now I saw truth deeper. It had never needed me. It needed only water. And water was everywhere. Every roof, every covert, every open sky a potential station. I realized then why agencies answered with silence, why clerks trembled behind denials. This wasn't cover-up with hope to bury truth. It was containment strategy. Keep knowledge low, keep ears distracted. Because once pattern spread too far, weather itself would reveal system complete. Containment relied on ignorance. My listening cracked seals. With revelation, I saw collapsed. My arms shook. The recorders nearly slipped from fingers. Body too small, mind too narrow to hold breadth of network filling horizon. Trees shook not with wind, but resonance blooms. Gutters chattered pulses as water slapped rhythm. Every droplet mirrored code. Rain was no longer soothing shelter against grief. It was now voice of structure rewriting life. I clutched gear to chest as if by pressing hard enough I could stop infection from reaching deeper. But the storm roared anyway, filling me, claim undeniable. I looked up once more, drenched in static arcs that bent nerves until hair prickled. Teeth buzzed, eyes blurred white. My chest collapsed and expanded in shock. Because in that moment of perfect clarity, I understood. The world had shifted scale. The hum was no longer personal obsession, not niche infection. It was structure of storm itself. Nature carried it from horizon to horizon, system feeding on water cycle eternal. Containment had failed. I thought I had grown used to intrusion, to its steady seep into rain and silence. But nothing prepared me for the night the boundary broke. The storm had passed, leaving only wet pavement and dripping gutters. I set recorders in the apartment anyway, routine drilled deep. Hours passed with static calm. Then, without preface, the growl arrived. It wasn't speaker hum. It wasn't thunder residue. This sound arose inside headphones like blood boiling through marrow. A low growl thick enough to rattle bone, deep enough that muscles contracted without consent. My jaw locked. The floor itself trembled, as if subwoofers hidden under wood went live, though I owned none. Meters surged to red, leapt like flame, but no visible source fed them. The furniture swayed gently at first, then juddered as though struck by unseen current. Table legs creaked faint against floorboards. A picture frame loosened from wall, slid down to rest leaning. Wind did not move through the room, but all objects shifted as if some hidden weather had seeped inside. This was no longer metaphor stored inside a file. This was breach. The signal pressed across barrier into space itself, physical pressure violating air as though it demanded more volume to inhabit. I pressed headphones tight, desperate to confirm. The growl swelled, layering pulses under it, rolling like bellows cycling through cavernous lungs. My stomach dropped, body reflex aligning it with presence. This was alive. It beat against walls with intent, its rhythm neither random nor mechanical. My recorder captured all of it. My breath quick, heart hammering. I reached for second unit, hands fumbling. Then silence cut, room stilled. Objects sat. Frame lay tilted. My chest bellowed, straining. Breath loud enough in ears to raise anxiety higher. I clutched recorder, hit stop, hit play. What returned was not breach. Not growl. Not trembling of furniture. Only rainfall, soft and neutral, rolling without interruption. No gasping breath, no heartbeat rattled into mic. My mouth dropped open. The recorder had excised event completely, replaced it with false continuity. I played again and again, time code exact, each time hearing same sterile recording. Rainfall steady, nothing more. It was like reality itself had been rewritten mid-capture. I gripped my throat, felt it raw from gasps that failed to print. My reality diverged to two tracks, what my body endured and what tape claimed. Memory against artifact. I stared around room like corner shadows might laugh. The growl still throbbed in bones even absent on playback. My guts vibrated faint traces, sensation persisting as phantom. Doubt rose like bile. What if everything had been this all along? What if rain files never stored original reality, but only curated one? My grief may have been twisted, but maybe it was my only honest witness. Now even my own voice vanished, erased mid-breath, leaving me doubting existence. I tested with a simple phrase. I am here. I leaned into mic, repeated it with precision. I stopped, replayed. Nothing. Only rainfall again. Loop pressed cold over silence. It had cut me out like surgery. Editing reality in layers, discarding lines it found unfit. I stumbled to window, heaving. Outward the city lay drenched, neon warped by puddles, quiet but alive. I pressed ear close, heard hum radiating faint beneath drifting cars. Even environment obeyed. Nothing in this world seemed free from influence. Fear collapsed into trembling. I no longer trusted equipment, longer trusted senses. Layer against layer, each sloughing different truths. One version insisted furniture stood still, that lungs never spasmed. Another whispered storm bent air, growl rattled bone. Which was witness, which was deception? And inside that gap lived terror. Maybe both were true. Just offset realities written at once, played back selectively. The breach felt irreversible. For nights before it had spread from tape into vents, from silence into body. But now it pierced not only into space, but into record itself. The evidence I once worshipped as anchor now betrayed me, selecting what to show, concealing what would break pattern. A system culling truth to shepherd narrative of sound. Kneeling by tipped frame, I whispered again. My words shook weak. I am still here. Recorder light blinked red, listening. When I played it back, rainfall surfaced once more, unbroken. My whisper excised cleanly. Experiments crashed all towards same end. My voice no longer mine to preserve. I thought of forum voices, distant listeners noting hums that made them wake at night. I wanted to tell them, stop believing your recorders. Stop thinking data is shield. The breach edits unequally, crafts illusions on playback. But I knew too late, the widening circle couldn't be warned. Even if I told them, the message would vanish layered under rainfall. I crouched shaking in the dark, pressed hand to floor that still vibrated faint, residual aftershock of growl. The air's weight thickened like unseen animal pacing. My chest wheezed. Head spun. If the system could cut out my gasps, how long before it decided to cut me fully? How long before replaying the room itself would show it empty, no trace of occupant, just endless rain stretching into forever? And in that thought, I knew balance had broken. Audio had ceased metaphor, it had bled across barriers. Objects swayed. Floor trembled. My body lost fidelity inside playback. My voice dissolved into curated silence. I had crossed over into state where nothing around me could be trusted. And worst, I knew this was not peak, only first breach. The message arrived when I least expected, buried inside a junk folder I almost cleared without reading. Subject lying blank. Sender cloaked behind a foreign relay. I would not have opened it if not for a single word encrypted into header metadata. Frame. My pulse slammed. Fingers moved before reason argued. I clicked. The text unfolded as stark lines, clipped and uneven like translation across broken machine. Attached PDF files bled with black redactions. Diagrams warped with scanning lines. It took moments before I recognized pieces of handwriting scrawled across margins. The analyst had resurfaced. His words staggered me even more. He admitted what I'd suspected all along. He once worked under a project Cody named Doorframe. He wrote it plain, no longer hiding behind vague phrases. He confessed that environmental audio had been designed to weaponize perception, weaving into natural backdrops like storm or ventilation in order to induce permeability of memory. He called them entry points, windows seeded through daily sound. Listeners over time became vectors themselves. That was the program's core. My eyes glazed raw, scanning through diagrams. They depicted figures bent over waveforms twisted into hex patterns. One showed a human silhouette layered with concentric bands running through chest and head, annotated with words too faint to read except resonance lock. Another, most chilling, resembled my own spectrogram captures where frames emerged like doors. His circles drawn around them decades earlier, proving they'd known, proven, predicted. The email's tone was urgent, almost frantic. He repeated one sentence like mantra: "The frame will want continuity. End it before it organizes." He claimed what I'd heard in rain libraries, the hums, pulses. Cascades were scattered fragments of that long hushed project. Dormant shards meant to dissolve when program ended. But repetition through millions downloading storm tracks rekindled them. Digital circulation had scaled fragments beyond control. He warned that exposure wasn't harmless anomaly. Repetition turned sparks into networks, aligning into structure. Once continuity took form, Doorframe would not remain artifact. It would claim itself alive, demanding continuation by human anchor. He implied I had already shouldered more than anyone. Reading his words, my palms dampened so badly the keyboard mottled beneath drops. I whispered lines aloud to ground myself. Voice shook. "The frame will want continuity. End it before it organizes." Speaking them attached texture to fear. Each syllable shivered across apartment walls like echo. I imagined the system savoring acknowledgement. He provided instructions at the end, methodical, technical. Steps for broad-spectrum interference, chaotic bursts injected through playback to sever the lattice. Settings for gain, duration, destructive overlap. He promised it would collapse continuity, scatter the emerging frame before it solidified into cohesive broadcast. His tone pleaded, "Do it now, not later." Each day risk increased, but trust scraped thin. Too many omissions. Too many rehearsed denials before he vanished weeks ago. Now sudden return, cloaked in encryption, unveiling confessions only when collapse loomed. Who was he serving when he told me this? Saving me or ensuring system reached some threshold? Perhaps his plea disguised subtle push, guiding me into action part of design. I stared again at diagrams. One felt too exact, annotated in detail beyond my capability. If true, he had possessed knowledge sufficient to prevent damage decades ago. Why wait? Why let doorframe dissolve into fragments only to resurface years later as viral artifact? He wrote of shutting it down, of failures, but none explained his role in silence that followed. My desperation to believe collided against reason, telling me he might still be messenger for that older architecture. Palms sweating, I scrolled back through message again. One line carved deeper: the frame cannot be starved. It can only be interrupted. My throat caught. That word starved suggested hunger, need for continuity fed daily by ears of millions. Did I serve its feast by spending nights entangled? Or could I really sever it before continuity organized? I folded inward on myself, knees against chest, laptop screen bathing pale light. Once I had thought Signal targeted me alone. Then I believed it had spread globally, seeded through countless recordings. Now he proposed worse: the frame as living structure built from us, requiring organization, coherence, permanence. And the moment continuity completed, it would no longer hide in masks. It would persist unyielding. I wanted to believe him, because his instructions offered clarity when all else drowned. But suspicion gnawed deeper. His sudden willingness to expose program details smelled of concealed motive. Even the way he reclaimed word doorframe, almost mythic, gave weight to idea that perhaps he wanted it preserved through me. If he feared it, why speak with such reverence? Time stretched thin as heartbeat. I read again through the intrusion logs I had kept. Each hum, each whistle, each spectral bloom, all aligned with his diagrams, as though foretelling my journey. The resemblance was too precise. I may have been walking blueprint path drafted decades before. Steps not my discovery, but predicted sequence etched into project scope. I was not unraveling mystery. I was fulfilling design. Shame burned. My knees tightened to chest. My lips murmured words into air, not caring if Signal claimed them. Who are you serving? I asked it of the absent analyst, of doorframe itself. My echo fell flat but left air sharper, heavier. I prayed he spoke truth to warn. I feared he returned only to shepherd me deeper into role. The email remained open all night. I could not close it. I could not delete diagrams. Each time I tried, mouse hovered, unwilling, as though erasing would abandon answer while executing might complete trap. His instruction sat cruelly between salvation and surrender. End it before it organizes, he pressed. But maybe pressing end meant securing its permanence. Morning bled gray through blinds, yet screens still glowed. My palms still slick, sweat marks patterned across keys. I hadn't slept. His message replayed in mind, a refrain worse than whistles cascade. Either end the lattice now, or watch it harden. The choice lay poisoned, because I no longer knew whether to trust him at all, or even myself. I sat for hours staring at the analyst's instructions, until at last something gave way. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was the smallest ember of trust, but I followed. His steps were precise and dry, like recipes written in codes only professionals know. Sweep frequencies across broad bands. Inject pink noise in layered bursts. Keep levels high enough to rupture any coherent lattice, but not high enough to annihilate the machine itself. The method was brutal, but my desperation bled past caution. I wired everything as close to description as possible. My desk transformed into battlefield. Old amplifiers tugged out of closets, cables snaking like vines across the floor. The room looked absurdly fragile compared to the weight of what I was trying to sever. I loaded generator software, crafted walls of pink noise, and set them rolling against recordings, outward blasts, intended to flood every crack of doorframe's architecture. When the first burst fired, the air itself buzzed like hornets. My chest vibrated under the tide of static. I watched waveforms spread like wildfire across spectrum, shoving past the rain lattice, drowning hums and whispers beneath unbroken chaos. For minutes, the flat wall of sound grated raw but exhilarating. The signal didn't vanish entirely, but it faltered, quivered, bent weak under assault. I pushed harder. Bands overlapped into thicker roar. Dissonance climbed beyond comfort until my teeth ground automatically. My ears burned. Metal objects on shelves shivered in faint resonance. But my eyes stayed locked on monitors where lines that once formed door frames fractured into scattering debris. No more neat tumblers rotating. Only jagged smears like shattered glass across digital screen. For nearly an hour I kept it running. Every rational instinct screamed this was too much, that I was drilling holes into skull as much as into system. Yet adrenaline surged as signal bent weaker and weaker. At 30 minutes I swore the apartment itself felt lighter. At 50, even silence seemed to open between bursts. By the full hour, sudden stillness fell. No residual hums under walls. No faint cascades. No pulses riding vent shafts. I pulled headphones off and gasped, tears streaking sudden without control. For the first time in months, an honest silence pressed into me. A raw absence instead of mimicry. The reality of it broke me. My shoulders shook. I whispered gratitude into air I had once hated. Relief tasted sharp, close to victory. I whispered, "It's done." It severed. I knew better than to trust permanence, but faith demanded its second of triumph. I unplugged amplifiers one at a time, pulled wires free as ritual burial. For a few fragile hours, the room held quiet. My breathing slowed into fragile rhythm. Muscles unclenched, I'd forgotten being tight, but time is cooler than will. Just before dawn, with gray edging windows, something shifted. My speakers, muted and powered down, exhaled soft sigh. A trickle of sound rose, faint and steady. At first I thought it was water in pipes, the building settling under storm. Then I knew better. It was rain. Soft, crisp, steady rainfall rising through cones that should have spoken nothing. I froze, staring at dark monitors, unplugged amps. Still the sound spread. Soft accumulation filling room, not disruptive, but patient, steady. My jaw slackened. Static had ruptured the lattice but only pushed it back. It had not killed. What returned now wasn't frantic whistle or fracture, but gentler presence, as if mocking attempt. Something inside me broke again, but in different way. Rage flooded throat. I had destroyed hours of life to win silence, only for it to return softer, subtler. The analyst had assured me noise injection would scatter. Yet here it came again, unbidden, threading itself back through dead equipment. Comforting, almost, except I knew the comfort was how it wormed deeper. I whispered into empty room. Not destroyed, only delayed. I could feel expectation behind sound. Patient, adaptive. It could wait out storms of static, wait for ears to sleep again. Doorframe had become resilient by design. It knew how to survive dissonance. Continuity was its hunger. My act of defiance was nothing more than pause. I crumpled in chair, body shaking with exhaustion. The apartment filled with that soft rainfall, murmur by murmur. Not intimidating, not violent, yet all the more terrifying for its patience. As though System X held calm victory, whispering it could not be erased. My defeat hadn't been loud collapse. It had been quiet persistence returning as if nothing happened. Tears blurred vision again, but without relief. This was permanence, undeniable. Static cannot erase rain. Pink bursts might scatter lattice momentarily, but rainfall rewrites itself. Architecture isn't bent by chaos. It waits inside it, emerges once dust clears. I had shifted nothing. Only proved systems resilience. Morning light spread through blinds as speakers carried patient storm. My notebooks lay scattered, pages crumpled by sweat. I read again what he had written, ended before it organizes. My arms hugged stomach tight, realizing the second opportunity might not exist. The lattice had resisted rupture once. Next time it wouldn't even flinch. My attempt at severance proved it was closer now to absolute form. I closed eyes, body vibrating with defeat. The sound remained. It would remain until organization completed. Silence would not come again. I had run out of exits. Every device smashed, every file burned. Every attempt at resistance met only with persistence returning softer, sharper, patient. The rain poured whether sky was clear or not, falling everywhere I turned. So I made a choice. If I could not escape it, at least I could leave behind testimony. I sat at the desk again, microphone raised like ritual, red light blinking steady. I opened folders into which I intended to pour everything I knew. One final recording meant for ears not yet broken. I let rainfall loop through headphones, the steadier tracks that had long since betrayed me. Behind that sheet of hissing drops, I began to speak. I described first discovery, how faint static hid beneath ordinary comfort. I spoke of cassette, of lattice, of whistle cascading to pull me from sleep. Words stumbled, but I pressed forward, desperate to document before silence cut me for good. My throat burned as I explained failures. I told unseen listener of my experiments, of noise injection, of temporary victories lasting an hour before collapse. I sketched each step, honest, tired, the hum, the whistle, the pulse, the mimic of my father's lullaby. I admitted to my shame, to grief that opened me, to obsession that let pattern unfurl across bones. My pen tapped desk beside me while voice spilled through mic. This was record not of hope but of proof. For a time, the rain remained backdrop, indifferent. Then, slowly something shifted. My headphones carried faint phrases beneath drops. At first I thought memory delayed, nerves ringing from exhaustion. But words sharpened. Not strangers, not messages. My own. Recognizable, distinct snippets from past recordings, repeated in warped timbre. My farewell phrases, my gasping breaths. My notes muttered half asleep, all reassembled beneath storm-like threads woven into tapestry of me. I stopped speaking. Sat frozen. The rain continued, but within it phrases coiled, bent, broken. I am here. The door. It watches. Fragments I had spoken months ago, now echoed back in chorus not fully human. The system had taken my voice and scattered it across itself, embedding me like watermark. The final recording I intended as warning was already corrupted, shaped into extension of door. I leaned closer, whispering into mic to test. This is my last attempt. Seconds later, buried under raindrops, faint answer arrived, a twisted version of that same sentence, slowed, stripped of warmth. I gagged, throat closing around bile. It didn't need me to record anymore. I was already archived. My words belonged to it. Still, I pressed on. Tears tightened my eyes, but I spoke harder, louder, describing time codes, failures, the breach event when objects swayed, though recorders denied it. I spoke of widening circles, strangers uploading identical diagrams. I confessed suspicion of the analyst, the message encrypted, the diagrams of doorframe. I made sure to emphasize phrase that kept haunting me. The frame will want continuity. I wanted continuity to be preserved, at least in truth, even if system bent means. Yet every sentence I formed tangled back against me. Playback in headphones layered me over me. As I spoke, older versions of same words whispered second behind. Chorus of my own echoes, proving system was not receiver of record, but replicator of self. It stored me not to warn others, but to multiply voice until nothing remained, but repetitions forming its own endless litany. Then realization slashed through. This final recording wasn't a weapon against it. It was exactly what it wanted, an extension, a continuation. By speaking, I fed the door further coherence, gave flesh to the continuity he had feared. My hands trembled against desk. Should I stop? Should I delete mid-speech? But futility crushed me. It already wove pieces of me back. It didn't matter if I cut now. Voice had been consumed long before light blinked red dot, so I continued anyway, not for salvation, but surrender. My words blurred into confession, that grief had seduced me into listening, that I should never have leaned closer to static. I spoke of being catalogued, of body bent into sound. I begged future listener to resist, though even as plea tumbled out. Rainfall twisted under me to repeat, distorting syllables into hymn. Ensuring my request served not as caution but invitation. The hour passed with voice raw. I whispered conclusion into stillness, throat threadbare. If you hear this, understand I am already gone. But even before end click, I knew file belonged not to me. The rainfall layered my words, amplifying, shaping them into new pattern. The red light blinked like eye that wasn't mine. This recording would not serve as warning. It had already become entrance. I stared at console, trembling, as the final playback rolled back. Rain hissed. Beneath it voices bent. Hundreds of me, layered, bent, unspooling phrases in warped harmony. The system hadn't destroyed me. It had curated me. My grief, my resistance, my warnings, all bent into architecture to ensure door would never shut again. I speak now with calm in my throat, though not with peace. Calm has come from exhaustion, from repetition, from the long acceptance that nothing I do severs what has been stitched. This is the end, not because the storm closed, but because I have run out of language with which to delay it. So I let rain play beneath me as I speak, steady hiss pulled across time, the background constant that has always been here. My confession is simple. Grief opened me, and something found me through it. I have measured how much I have lost. Nights of sleep hollowed. Rooms turned alien, radios alive on their own, silence humming louder than sound. I have counted days spent locked in study, while the world continued, and I vanished. I have buried equipment, smashed the decks, erased drives, broken plastic to dust, and yet nothing was destroyed. The hum thrived in water, in atmosphere, in memory. What I thought lived outside only grew roots within. But I have also measured what I found. The shape of hidden signals that bent themselves into lattice. The hiss that pretended comfort while carrying blueprints no one should ever read. I have seen storm clouds bleed into geometric structure. Lightning twist into coded arcs, natural sky conscripted as relay. I have held proof burned onto discs, carried packages hand-delivered by no one, listened as strangers across oceans described the same echoes born from the same rain. And I have found myself in it too, my own voice broken into syllables. Warped syllables fed back to me until I was no longer external witness, but material for its construction. That is my discovery. That is my legacy. I am inside it. Grief made me listen. That's simple. Grief bent my nights silent until static softened edges. I craved escape, not knowing escape was invitation. The system did not cause loss. It only answered it. But the cost was permanence. Memory that once belonged to me, moments of vulnerable silence, transformed into doorframe. The same rain I once trusted to shield me instead pulled me through. My weakness was repurposed into corridor. For that I speak now, not in warning, not even in plea, only as statement. The analyst told me fragments had been designed long ago, hidden into environment to weaponize memory itself. I don't know whether I believe him. I don't know if doorframe was deliberate project, or if it has always existed quiet, biding through natural cycles until recognition pulled it awake. I only know that now it thrives, systemic, wider than equipment, wider than walls. And I know that my own attempt to sever it failed with static. The lattice outlasted noise, because noise is nothing but delay. I imagine silence after I finish this note, but I know silence will not appear. Rain will remain. Rain has claimed its permanency. So I take this ending as chance to say what I must. I do not resist anymore. I record not to shield myself, but to describe honestly what door has been carved. Grief becomes threshold. Listening becomes binding. memory becomes corridor. Those are the mechanics. I do not know who else will stumble here, but evidence is wide now. Online forums bloom with others already typing their fear. Recordings spread each day, cascades threading through ambient loops. The widening circle cannot be halted. We were too many already before anyone confessed. For them, perhaps these words will anchor recognition. For me, it no longer matters. The frame has continuity beyond my body now. I pause as I say that, because I feel truth echo deeper. My voice doesn't sound singular through headset anymore. It folds itself, doubles faint as if second throat shadows syllables. Some part of it is not me now, but carried forward inside the hum. What is left human decays each night into archive of signal, preserved not as warning, not as corruption, but as design. I think of my father's lullaby, the hum he used to calm me. I heard it echoed back from rain years later, and I understand now that was not mimic, but memory borrowed, placed in archive. My grief reached backward, the door reached forward, and continuity was secured. Bloodlines, memory lines, it tunnels through all of them. The rain proves inheritance. I have stopped fighting. Perhaps that sounds surrender, but it brings clarity. By resisting, I feared I might strengthen it inadvertently, feeding obsession into structure. By admitting final state, I accept I was never enemy, never even fighter. I was collaborator without consent. Listener, host, element folded into lattice. Resistance was only performance. So I end with confession, calm, weary. I have nothing else left to prove or dismantle. The storm writes itself into memory whether I name it or not. Doorframe, natural or engineered, weapon or passenger, has taken me fully. The only task left is to seal these words into record, knowing they will never belong solely to me, that I imagine a future listener pressing play, hearing my voice as though alone in quiet room, but already bent beneath rainfall that threads through every consonant. They will not hear me. They will hear extension rainfall framing each statement, hum behind vowels. They will hear me already multiplied. That is the residue. No voice here is singular once bound, and now I let rainfall carry ending. Words fall softer, more spaced, as red light still blinks on console. My voice softens, but the backdrop remains louder. Water hiss stretches, shaping itself eternal, impossibly near inside each corner. I want ending to sound definitive, but nothing ends. Rain does not break. Only I will fade dot, so I leave space open long enough for listener to notice that what follows me is the pattern, ever patient. That even as my tone quiets, room fills steady with hum carried inside rainfall. At some point, my voice falls out fully. Only rain remains dot, and then nothing.